As you settle into the quiet of this moment, allow your breath to slow and your body to relax. Let the weight of the day melt away like morning mist lifting from a still lake. Close your eyes if you wish, or simply soften your gaze. Feel the tension in your shoulders release as we embark on a gentle journey together. This is not a tale of haste or drama, but a slow unfolding, like the turning of delicate pages in an ancient book, resting on a weathered oak table, illuminated by candlelight. We are traveling not just through time, but through feeling and atmosphere. We're stepping into a world of whispers and shadows, of palaces and poetry, where silk rustles against stone and steel gleams in flickering light. This is a journey into the life of a queen who ruled not just with power, but with precision and grace. A woman who shaped a nation from her solitude. Elizabeth Tudor entered a world trembling with uncertainty. Born into a royal household where ambition and betrayal hung heavy in the air, her life would be marked by danger and brilliance in equal measure. She would learn to wear masks not for deception, but for survival. To speak when it served her purpose, and to hold her silence when words could prove too costly. She would come to understand that a crown's true weight lies not in its gold, but in the responsibility it represents. And time and again, she would choose to bear that burden alone. Let your breath deepen as we step closer to her world. We approach not to judge or question, but to observe and understand. See her as a child, wide-eyed in ornate halls, where whispers carried more danger than swords. Sit beside her as she studies late into the night, her candle burning low, her mind reaching far beyond the confines of her chamber. Watch as her fingers trace the words of ancient philosophers, stirring a world of knowledge that lay quietly beneath her touch. Feel the cold stone of the tower beneath your feet, where Elizabeth once paced in silence, accused of treason, her fate balanced on the edge of a whisper. Walk with her into the throne room as she takes her place as sovereign of a divided realm. Notice how her breath remains steady, her face unreadable, her voice clear as a mountain stream. Observe as she refuses the comfort of marriage, choosing instead the solitary path of sovereign rule. A path where every eye watches and every step echoes through the corridors of history. This is not the story of a fairy tale queen. It is the tale of a woman who crafted herself into a monarch with deliberate care and wisdom. A woman who wielded silence like a shield and intellect like a compass. She ruled not through violence, but through presence. She held her court in suspense and kept her enemies at arm's length. Picture her dancing alone beneath glittering chandeliers, then standing firm beneath stormy skies with a steadiness that no man could shake. Tonight, you need not concern yourself with memorizing dates or names. Instead, allow yourself to float gently into Elizabeth's world. Listen to the rain tapping against palace windows. Feel the hush of the candlelit council chamber. Watch the quill move across parchment in the stillness of night. This is a history not of dry facts, but of rich sensations, of texture and mood, of slow transformation and quiet resilience. Let the sounds of her world envelop you now, the soft rustle of brocade skirts brushing against cold stone floors, the distant toll of a chapel bell echoing through the mist, the steady beat of a heart beneath a royal gown. Allow each detail to settle in your mind like dew upon leaves, like dust on the edge of an ancient mirror. There is no need to follow closely or to remember. Simply receive. Simply relax. As the stars begin to twinkle beyond your window, as the hush of evening wraps around you like a velvet cloak, allow yourself to drift with the story. Move with the slow current of memory. Sink into the soft stillness between words. Let Queen Elizabeth's world unfold around you like a dream, not to awaken, but to guide you gently toward rest. We begin now. The candle is lit, the curtain rises, and in the quiet heart of England, a queen is born. Elizabeth's childhood was a tapestry of contradictions. Raised in a world of opulence, she also knew the chill of uncertainty. Her mother's fate cast a long shadow, teaching Elizabeth early that beauty and favor were fleeting things. Yet in this world of shifting alliances, she found solace in learning. Picture her bent over books, her red gold hair catching the light, her quick mind drinking in languages, history, and statcraft. As a young woman, Elizabeth navigated a treacherous court with a grace that belied her years. She learned to measure her words, to smile when her heart was heavy, to dance with suitors while keeping her own counsel. In her chambers, away from prying eyes, she would often stand before a mirror, practicing the mask of queenship long before the crown was hers. When at last she ascended the throne, Elizabeth faced a nation divided by religion and drained by war. Many doubted that a woman could rule alone. But Elizabeth had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. She addressed her people with a voice that rang clear and true, declaring that though she had the body of a weak and feeble woman, she had the heart and stomach of a king. Imagine her in those early years of rule, pacing the long galleries of her palaces late into the night, the weight of decisions heavy on her shoulders, the fate of a nation in her hands. Yet even in these moments of solitude, she was never truly alone. The ghosts of her past walked with her, her father's ambition, her mother's tragedy, her sister's mistakes. From these shadows, Elizabeth drew strength and caution in equal measure. As the years passed, Elizabeth's reign became known as a golden age, but gold, for all its beauty, is a heavy metal. The queen who danced so lightly in her youth now moved with measured steps, each decision carefully weighed. She fostered art and exploration, sending ships to circle the globe and welcoming playwrights to her court. All the while, she kept a watchful eye on the horizon, wary of threats both foreign and domestic. In matters of the heart, Elizabeth remained an enigma. She entertained suitors and flirted with the idea of marriage, but always drew back at the last moment. Some called her the Virgin Queen, others whispered of secret loves. But in truth, Elizabeth had wedded herself to England, forsaking personal happiness for the good of her realm. As twilight fell on her reign, Elizabeth faced her mortality with the same grace and determination that had marked her life. She had outlived most of her childhood companions, outlasted her enemies, and outmaneuvered those who would see her fall. In her final years, she could often be found gazing out windows, lost in thought. What memories played behind those eyes that had seen so much? What wisdom had she gleaned from a lifetime of rule? Now, as our journey through Elizabeth's world draws to a close, let the sounds of her era fade gently away. The rustle of silk, the murmur of courtiers, the scratch of quill on parchment, all recede like the tide. Feel the weight of history lifting from your shoulders, replaced by the soft embrace of your bed. Elizabeth's story, like all great tales, does not truly end. It lives on in the whispers of old stones, in the pages of dusty books, and the very air of England itself. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you not the burden of dates and facts, but the essence of a woman who shaped herself into a legend. Let your breath slow to match the rhythm of a long-ago era. Allow your mind to float in the space between waking and dreaming, where queens still dance in candlelit halls, and the echoes of history lull you gently into slumber. Rest now, knowing that in the quiet corners of your imagination, Elizabeth's world still turns, a golden age preserved in the amber of memory. Before the weight of a crown rested on her brow, before her image was painted in layers of gold leaf and regal velvet, and before the world would come to know her as the Virgin Queen, ruler of a vast empire and symbol of endurance, she was simply a child, a small, quiet girl born into a palace scented with tension and wrapped in silk, yet filled with shadows. She would one day command a nation and shape an age, but in her earliest days, she was a delicate presence in a turbulent court, a child whose very existence stirred questions rather than answers. Her name was Elizabeth, and even in infancy, her life was shaped not by certainty, but by the persistent hum of risk, silence, and watchful eyes. Breathe in deeply now, letting the quiet of this story begin to slow your thoughts. Let the noise of the present melt away, as if each word were a soft wave reaching the shore, soothing your senses. With each exhale, release the tight corners of your day and step gently into a different time, one of candlelight and stone corridors, where history whispered through tapestries and destiny stirred softly in cradles. It is September in the year 1533. The summer lingers in the gardens, but the air has started to carry the cool edge of autumn. The leaves on the trees outside Greenwich Palace move gently in the breeze, brushing together with a sound like paper against silk. Inside the grand and echoing chambers of the palace, under vaulted ceilings and behind heavy wooden doors, a baby girl is born to Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII. She is wrapped in fine linen, her tiny hands curled near her face, her breathing even and soft. The servants who tend to her speak in low tones, and their movements are measured, precise, uncertain. There is no shouting of joy in the halls, no grand celebration, no echoes of triumph. For although she is healthy, beautiful, and perfect in form, she is not the child they had hoped for. She is not a boy. Let your shoulders soften and picture the quiet within those walls. Imagine the flicker of firelight reflecting against polished stone, the smell of fresh rushes laid on the floor, the warmth of a late afternoon sun falling through tall, narrow windows. The baby, Elizabeth, lies in her cradle, unaware of the storm of expectation that swirls just beyond the chamber walls. She is calm, asleep, untouched by politics, untouched by fear. But around her, the court shifts. Henry VIII had broken with the Roman Church to marry Anne Boleyn, a bold and dangerous act that fractured alliances and redefined kingdoms. The hope was that their union would bring forth a son to secure the Tudor line and justify the cost of the king's rebellion. And yet it is this child, this girl, who arrives instead. Even as she draws her first breaths, the room seems to hold its own space between celebration and disappointment, between pride and silence. No one dares to speak too loudly, and already the narrative of Elizabeth's life begins to thread itself with caution. Let your breathing fall into a steady rhythm, like footsteps echoing through a long hallway. The hush that followed her birth did not erase her existence. It only shaped it, folding it into something quieter, more watchful. And so, from her earliest days, Elizabeth existed in a world where the surface glittered with royalty, but underneath there was a current of fragility that could not be ignored. As she grew from an infant to a toddler, the court watched her not as an heir, but as an uncertainty. Her mother, Anne, remained queen, but her hold on that title was far from secure. Rumors began to take root, subtle at first, then louder. Accusations whispered through gilded halls, glances exchanged behind fans and closed doors. Elizabeth, still too young to understand, was already at the center of a story she could not yet hear. And then, without warning, everything changed. When Elizabeth was just 2 years and 8 months old, her mother was arrested, charged with treason, and taken to the Tower of London. The little girl would never see her again. Anne Boleyn was executed on May 19, 1536. One day, Elizabeth was a princess. The next, she was declared illegitimate, stripped of her royal title, and effectively erased from the line of succession. The court did not explain this to her. There were no words to soften the blow. She was simply moved physically and symbolically from the center of attention to its farthest edge. Now breathe slowly and allow your body to rest into this stillness. Picture the child in her new surroundings, far from the palace, far from the father who once doted on her, far from the mother whose name could no longer be spoken. She lived in Hatfield House and other estates, her world reduced to a handful of attendants, her questions left unanswered. And yet, even in this silence, something within her remained whole. Elizabeth was watched closely, but she was also watching. Even as a young child, she learned to observe, to calculate, to withhold. Where other children might have cried or acted out, she became composed. She understood instinctively that emotion was dangerous and visibility even more so. Her strength was not born of rebellion, but of adaptation. She learned how to be quiet without being forgotten, how to listen without reacting, and how to learn without revealing what she had learned. Now imagine her, no more than 6 or 7 years old, sitting near a window with a book in her lap. The light is soft and golden, the late afternoon sun painting long shadows across the floor. A tutor speaks gently beside her, reading aloud in Latin. Elizabeth listens, her small fingers tracing the words on the page. Her mind is sharp, absorbing every sound, every meaning, every nuance. In a world that had cast her aside, she is building herself from within. As the years passed, her education became her sanctuary. She studied with the discipline of someone who understood the stakes. Latin, Greek, French, Italian, theology, philosophy, history, these were not merely lessons, but tools. She saw that knowledge could be armor, that words could protect when titles were stripped away. She read Cicero and Seneca before she had turned 12. She memorized scripture and translated psalms with the grace and precision of a scholar twice her age. Her tutors marveled at her intellect, but she never used it to boast. Instead, she tucked it away like a pearl beneath layers of quiet observation. Let yourself feel that quiet now. Elizabeth was no longer simply a child, lesson by lesson. She played no games, now breathed deeply once more. This child, born not into triumph, but into tension, not into celebration, but into silence, would one day rise, after the silence that marked her early childhood, after the loss of her mother, her title, and the place she once held at the center of courtly life. Elizabeth entered a new stage of her existence, one that would not be defined by royal favor or public recognition, but by the calm, deliberate act of learning, by the slow and quiet construction of her intellect, by an education that would not only fill her mind with knowledge, but shape her character, fortify her spirit, and provide her with the very tools through which, one day, she would not merely survive, but rule, with wisdom, with eloquence, with a command not born from war or inheritance, but from the long, unseen discipline of the mind. Take a deep breath now, and as you exhale, allow your body to settle more deeply into the stillness you're creating. Imagine a room lit only by the golden flicker of candles, shelves heavy with leather-bound books, and outside, a soft rain tapping gently against the window panes, while inside, a small figure with auburn hair sits quietly at a desk, tracing careful lines on parchment with a sharp quill. This is how Elizabeth begins her days, not as a duty, not as a punishment, but as a sacred ritual through which her world takes form and order, far from the noise of court, far from the judgment of the crown. Her education was not a courtesy, not a pastime, but an act of deliberate inner construction. Her tutors, far from treating her with condescension, challenged her with complex texts, ancient languages, theological arguments, and difficult ideas. Roger Ascham, one of the most esteemed among them, saw in Elizabeth not only an extraordinary mind, but a fierce will to understand, to question, to analyze, and to remember. She did not learn because she was told to. She learned because she needed to, because she wanted to, and because in knowledge she found a way to steady herself in a world that had taken so much from her. She began with Latin, and soon she could read Cicero fluently, translate biblical passages with elegance, and write letters that amazed her instructors for their clarity, their precision, and their style. Then came Greek, followed by French, Italian, and eventually Spanish. Each language was not merely a new form of communication, but a new lens through which to see the world, to understand power, politics, and history. Elizabeth didn't seek to rely on the translations or explanations of others. She sought direct understanding, and in doing so, she built a foundation no one could remove from her. But beyond languages, her education stretched toward history, philosophy, theology, mathematics, music. In the arts, her training was that of a prince, not a lady in waiting. Her days were structured with rigor, from dawn to night, with time for reading, for writing, for conversation with her tutors, for quiet reflection upon what she had learned. While other girls her age learned to stitch embroidery or charm noble guests, Elizabeth memorized treatises on logic, compared theological doctrines, analyzed wars, and studied the lives and failures of monarchs as if she already understood that their lessons might one day be her own. Now imagine the sound of a fire crackling softly in a stone hearth, the gentle scratch of a quill on parchment, the low murmur of a tutor reading aloud while Elizabeth listens with half-closed eyes. Not in fatigue, but in contemplation, her body still, her mind alert, expanding, connecting the words she hears to the knowledge already within her. Her gaze is steady, her thoughts focused, and her memory precise. She does not drift, she does not forget. Everything she hears is stored, considered, woven into the fabric of her inner world. And in this process, without attention, without applause, Elizabeth is growing not just in age, but in depth. She is developing a capacity for thought and a sensitivity that will define her later as a ruler, a sensitivity to language, to tone, to meaning beyond the obvious, an intuition for the motives of others, an elegance in silence, a timing in response. Her learning is not loud, it is not performative, it is methodical, deliberate, quiet, and inward, a long and careful preparation for a destiny not yet spoken, but already breathing in every page she turns. Breathe again, slowly, and let yourself drift into the rhythm of this learning. Picture the study becoming warmer, more timeless, more sacred, where Elizabeth finds comfort not in company, but in the quiet conversation with the minds of long-dead thinkers, ancient poets, Renaissance theologians. She does not need applause. She does not seek attention, because she has learned that the truest form of power is the one that is cultivated alone and carried within. Her education does not merely make her an educated woman. It makes her a queen in the making, a strategist in silence, an observer with patience, a mind armed with arguments instead of weapons, with calm instead of fear, with subtlety instead of spectacle. Knowledge becomes her form of meditation, her form of prayer, her form of resistance. And while the world forgets her name, while male heirs rise and fall, while politics turns on whims and executions, Elizabeth remains in her quiet rooms of study, building something far more durable than favor or fortune or lineage. She is building an identity that does not depend on what others say she is, but on what she knows herself to be. Now stay with that image just a little longer. Let the slow rhythm of this story merge with the rhythm of your breath. Let Elizabeth's learning, her discipline, her calm strength reflect in your own stillness, in your own inner space, where you too can plant ideas, nurture your spirit, and find in thought a refuge from noise, from chaos, from uncertainty. Because in every page she read, in every sentence she translated, Elizabeth was not only learning about the world, she was remembering who she was and who she could become. Even when no one else believed in her, even when everything had been taken from her, she kept going, with a book in her hand and a growing certainty in her heart that one day, her mind would be her crown and her silence, her greatest triumph. The road that led Elizabeth to the throne of England was not paved with certainty or celebration, but with shadows and shifting loyalties, with silent risks and quiet endurance. And it was not the kind of path that welcomes the footsteps of a girl declared illegitimate, nor does it open willingly for a woman in a world ruled by men. It was a path that had to be navigated with caution, with patience, with wisdom far beyond her years. And as Elizabeth stepped into adolescence, her life became increasingly entangled in the web of Tudor politics, a world where words were weapons, Trust was fleeting, and survival itself was a delicate dance of restraint and intuition. Let your body rest now. Let your breath become slower and deeper. Imagine a corridor dimly lit by torches flickering against stone walls. Imagine the echo of footsteps softly trailing down that hall, and in the quiet, imagine Elizabeth moving through these halls not as a princess adorned in jewels, but as a young woman with her head slightly bowed, her thoughts guarded, her every word weighed carefully before it left her lips. She was not the favorite of the court, nor the heir in waiting, but she was there, watching, learning, listening to the murmurs behind closed doors, and the glances exchanged over dinner tables, collecting pieces of the world around her and building, quietly, a sense of who she needed to become. After the death of her father, King Henry VIII, the throne passed to her young half-brother Edward VI, a child raised in the strict doctrines of Protestant reform. Elizabeth remained at court during his short reign, but always at the periphery. She had learned that attention could be dangerous, and so she remained composed, studious, and careful. She understood the currents of religious change that flowed through the court. She knew that alliances were formed and broken in hushed conversations, and that favor was a fleeting thing, especially for a daughter born of a mother so controversially remembered. When Edward fell ill and his reign began to slip toward an early end, a new wave of instability threatened the realm. And in the scramble for succession, the name of Lady Jane Grey was suddenly placed on the lips of nobles and power brokers, and for a moment, Elizabeth watched as another girl, equally royal, equally young, was named queen in her place and swiftly removed. She did not protest. She did not challenge. She waited, and within days, her older half-sister, Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, was proclaimed queen, and England shifted again, this time toward Catholic restoration. Mary Tudor's reign was marked by fervent devotion and political suspicion, and though Elizabeth presented herself with outward loyalty, she was Protestant by education and, more dangerously, by reputation. In a kingdom increasingly tense with religious conflict, her very existence became a threat. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Rumors that she conspired against her sister, that she plotted with reformers, that she harbored ambitions too bold for a woman of her station, and soon those rumors caught fire. In 1554, Elizabeth was arrested and taken to the Tower of London, accused of treasonous correspondence linked to Wyatt's rebellion, and for days she remained there, within the cold stone walls that had once held her mother before her execution. She walked the same worn stones, slept beneath the same ceilings, and breathed the air of history's cruel repetitions. She was 20 years old, alone, watched constantly, and unsure whether each sunrise would be her last. Now breathe in slowly and picture her there, a pale figure in the dim morning light, dressed in modest silks, walking slowly in the garden of the tower beneath the watchful eyes of guards. Every movement deliberate, every glance measured, though she denied all charges. And though evidence was lacking, her fate was not her own to command. It hung on the mood of a queen, the pulse of a rumor, the silence of a council, and still she did not cry out or beg or break. She endured, as she had always done, with silence as her shield and intellect as her armor. Eventually, she was released, but not truly free, sent to the countryside under house arrest, surrounded by spies and informants, her letters examined, her conversations observed, and yet even then, she held herself with grace. She spent her days reading, translating texts, walking in the garden, preparing not in defiance, but in quiet readiness for a future that remained uncertain. And then, as time passed, the tides turned again. Mary's health began to decline. Her marriage to Philip of Spain produced no heir. The nation grew restless under the return of Catholic rule, and eyes began to shift slowly, cautiously toward Elizabeth once more, not as a threat, but as a possibility. And when Mary died in November of 1558, the crown, after so many detours, was offered to the girl who had been called illegitimate, imprisoned, exiled, forgotten. Let your breath soften now and allow your mind to drift to that morning, cold and gray with mist. When Elizabeth stood beneath an ancient oak at Hatfield House and heard the news that would change her life forever. "This is the Lord's doing," she is said to have whispered, "and it is marvelous in our eyes." And perhaps in that moment, the years of silence, of doubt, of study, of restraint, all converged into one breath. And the girl who had walked among shadows became quietly and fully a queen. She did not seize the throne with force, nor demand it with noise. She received it with stillness, with solemnity, with the weight of memory in her heart, and thus began the reign of Elizabeth I. Not from a place of certainty, but from a long path of endurance, of survival, of silent strength, and of a mind sharpened not by privilege, but by necessity. Let your body rest now in the rhythm of that thought. Let the quiet resilience of her journey wrap around you like a warm blanket. The path to the throne was never easy, never direct, but Elizabeth had learned to walk slowly, steadily, and with grace. And it was this grace, not noise, not power, that would define the era to come. Elizabeth had now become Queen of England. Yet what awaited her was not the serenity of triumph, but the immense, delicate challenge of transforming a fragile kingdom into a realm of strength and stability. She was not handed peace, nor certainty, nor unity. The throne she inherited came burdened with unrest, with financial strain, with bitter divisions of religion and loyalty, and with the lingering doubts of those who believed a woman could never rule with wisdom or command respect among monarchs and ministers. But Elizabeth did not seek to imitate the men who had reigned before her, nor did she rely on brute force or lineage alone to affirm her place. Instead, she would govern through an art both subtle and bold, a performance both calculated and sincere, one that demanded patience, precision, intuition, and unshakable presence. Now breathe deeply and let your thoughts settle into the quiet space where strategy meets stillness, where decisions are not made in haste but weighed like gold on a scale. Imagine Elizabeth seated in her council chamber, dressed in deep, rich fabrics, her face composed yet unreadable. As her advisors speak and argue, she listens without interrupting, her silence not a sign of absence, but of deliberate attention. She does not rush to prove herself, nor does she speak to fill the silence. Instead, she waits until the moment is right, and when she speaks, her words carry the weight of careful thought and quiet authority. She understood that ruling was not only about policy and governance, but about perception, about creating an image that inspired loyalty and awe. She learned to speak in layers, to say enough to guide, but never so much as to be fully known. She mastered the art of ambiguity, allowing her subjects to project onto her their hopes, their fears, their ideals. She became not just a monarch, but a symbol, a mirror, a mystery. And it was in that space of controlled visibility that her power took root, firm and deep. Let your breath grow longer now, slower and more relaxed as you picture the careful choreography of her public appearances, the way she walked among her people slowly and with grace, the way she raised her hand to silence a crowd or lowered her gaze in solemn prayer. Every gesture was thought out, every word rehearsed, not for deception but for impact. She ruled not with the brute authority of command, but with the refined skill of influence. She understood the theater of politics, and she played her role with mastery, knowing that the strength of a queen lies not only in law, but in presence. She also knew how to balance power among those around her. She did not marry, not because she did not believe in love or union, but because she saw clearly the cost of shared sovereignty. She understood that a foreign prince or a domestic noble would complicate, dilute, or challenge her rule. And so she fashioned herself instead as the Virgin Queen, married to her realm, sovereign in body and soul. This was not weakness, but control, and it allowed her to remain above faction, above alliance, a monarch beholden only to her crown and her people. Picture now the great halls of court, filled with courtiers and ambassadors, artists and scholars, all watching her, all wondering what she would do or say. And in the midst of that crowd, she stood luminous. Her words carefully chosen, her tone firm but not harsh, her intellect razor-sharp, and yet veiled beneath layers of poise and gentleness. She disarmed with charm and delighted with wit, but behind every smile was a calculation. Behind every nod, a decision already forming. In moments of crisis, she did not collapse under pressure. She stepped forward with clarity when the Spanish Armada threatened her shores. She did not retreat behind palace walls. She rode out among her troops in armor, declaring her readiness to live and die among them. And in that moment, she became more than queen. She became a living embodiment of national spirit, not through aggression, but through presence. Not through violence, but through courage calmly shown. Let yourself rest now in the rhythm of that presence, in the stillness of her steadiness. Understand that the art of ruling for Elizabeth was not domination, but guidance, not noise, but tone, not declarations, but timing. And this delicate control, this elegance of mind and bearing, was her greatest strength. She chose her counselors wisely and listened to them fully, but the final word was always hers. She used delay as a tool. Knowing that time itself can be an instrument of persuasion, she never made decisions out of panic and rarely out of pride. Instead, she built trust through consistency, earned reverence through restraint, and inspired admiration through the beauty of self-mastery. Now breathe in again and let your body soften with the thought that even in great responsibility, calm can prevail, that even among the fires of conflict, one can rule with grace. Elizabeth's reign was not free of hardship, but the way she bore it, with dignity, with intellect, with style, was what transformed her from ruler to legend, from monarch to myth. She was both artist and strategist, both woman and emblem, both voice and silence. And in mastering the art of ruling, she showed the world that power, when wielded with patience, beauty, and quiet strength, can endure not only for a reign, but for centuries. As Elizabeth's reign matured and the crown settled more firmly upon her head, one question continued to haunt the chambers of court, to echo through the scrolls of ambassadors, and to be whispered behind closed doors by both friend and foe. Who would she marry and when? And why had she not done so already? For a queen, it was not simply a matter of love or companionship. It was an expectation, a duty, a political necessity to ensure the continuation of the Tudor line, to solidify alliances, to share the burden of rule. And yet Elizabeth, calm and unyielding, delayed, refused, and ultimately redefined what it meant to reign as a woman alone. She did not marry, and in that choice, or rather in that refusal, she built one of the most iconic identities in royal history, that of the Virgin Queen. Let your body soften now. Let the rhythm of your breath fall gently in time with this quiet unfolding. And imagine Elizabeth standing alone in her private chambers, the flicker of candlelight reflecting in the mirrors of silver and glass, her reflection multiplied infinitely in the polished surfaces around her, as though even the room could not help but echo the solitude that was both chosen and imposed. She is not lonely, but she is alone, a difference she understands deeply. She is adorned in silks embroidered with symbols of purity, with pearls threaded into her hair, with a face painted white, not as vanity, but as performance, as protection, as power. Suitors came and went, princes, dukes, and noblemen of high birth and foreign promise, treaties drafted and dreams entertained. Yet each time, Elizabeth stepped back from the threshold of union. Some believed she feared the loss of power. Others whispered of a secret love she could not consummate. Many speculated endlessly on what her heart desired. But the truth, as always, rested quietly within her, and would not be surrendered to public gaze. She knew that in marriage she would lose not just herself, but the clarity of her rule, the autonomy of her mind, the singularity of her image, and perhaps more than that, she knew that remaining unwed allowed her to become something no queen had ever fully become before complete unto herself. Now breathe in slowly and imagine the pressure. The letters from Parliament urging her to choose a husband. The anxious advisers who feared the throne would pass to uncertain heirs. The foreign emissaries whose gifts arrived with veiled intentions and long lists of demands. And through it all, Elizabeth remained unwavering, offering polite deferrals, vague assurances, and diplomatic dances that led nowhere. She was not cold, nor was she cruel. She simply understood the stakes better than anyone else. She knew that a queen who married would be expected to obey, and a queen who obeyed would no longer rule on her own terms. And so she built a new myth, a powerful narrative that reshaped her identity in the eyes of her people. She became married to England itself. Her love belonged to her subjects. Her devotion was not to a man, but to a nation. And in this transformation, she fused the personal with the political. She became both sovereign and symbol. Not just a woman, but an idea, a living embodiment of chastity, virtue, and untouchable strength. And while her body aged and her power grew, she remained, in the mind of her people, ever young, ever noble, ever faithful to a higher purpose. Picture now a great hall filled with courtiers, their eyes turning to her as she enters draped in gold and white, her posture regal, her movements deliberate, every step a declaration of independence, every smile calculated to soothe or to challenge. She walks among them as both monarch and mystery, a woman whose body has never been claimed, whose authority has never been shared. And in this enigma lies her enduring power. She is admired, feared, revered, and though many claim to know her, few truly do. She uses this image of virginity not as denial, but as elevation. She surrounds herself with symbols of purity and divine right, likening her rule to that of the Virgin Mary, untouchable, sacred, guided by providence. And yet she is no saint. She is fully human. She laughs, she suffers, she doubts, but she never allows those moments to weaken her public persona. She guards her mystery because she knows it protects her. She hides her pain because it preserves her image. And in this constant balancing act, she reveals her mastery. Let your breath slow further now and feel how this solitude, chosen and sharpened, becomes not a burden, but a form of discipline, a space from which she draws strength. She reads late into the night. She writes with clarity and insight. She governs with a mind unclouded by jealousy or divided loyalties. And the absence of a king beside her is not seen as a loss, but as a symbol of sovereignty absolute. She is not half of a whole. She is a realm in herself. And with each passing year, the world adjusts to her singularity. The people begin to see her not as a woman awaiting marriage, but as a queen complete in her own right. The Virgin Queen becomes legend. Her image etched into metals, painted onto canvases, praised in poems, and whispered about in songs. And yet beneath the myth, the woman still walks her palace alone, still carries the weight of her choices in the quiet of the night, still wonders, perhaps, what might have been, but never doubts what must be. Let your body rest now in the stillness of that image, and let the strength of her solitude surround you like soft velvet. Elizabeth did not marry because she chose to rule, and in that choice, she gave herself not to a man, but to history, to legacy, to the idea that a woman, whole and unclaimed, could wield power with dignity, with brilliance, and with unwavering grace. Even as Elizabeth's image solidified into legend and her authority stretched quietly across the English realm, there remained those beyond her borders and within her own lands who could not accept that a woman ruled alone, who feared the power she had gathered in silence, who viewed her Protestant reign as a threat to the ancient order of Europe, and so her throne, though radiant in ceremony, stood always on the edge of danger, with enemies moving like shadows through courts and cathedrals, with whispers that carried daggers, and with ships that gathered on distant seas, waiting for their moment to strike. For to be a queen in a divided world was not only to govern, but to guard, not only to lead, but to survive. Now let your breath deepen and picture the darkened coasts of England under a moonless sky, the sound of wind against cliffs, the gulls calling in the distance, and the sense unspoken but constant that somewhere out there, across the black waters, eyes watched her. Plans formed against her. Spain, the most powerful Catholic empire of the age, ruled by Philip II, once a suitor and now a rival, saw in Elizabeth not a monarch, but a heretic, a disruption to divine order, and with every English ship that carried Protestant ideas to the Low Countries, with every secret alliance formed in opposition to Rome, Philip's patience thinned, his conviction hardened, and his plans for war took root. But the danger was not only beyond the waves, it lived also in the hearts of her own subjects, for England was not one thing. It was a realm torn between old loyalties and new beliefs, and for those who still whispered the names of saints in secret chapels, Elizabeth's reign was not divine but blasphemous, and so plots emerged like weeds in a garden long untended, conspiracies tied to letters smuggled in shoes and codes hidden in ink, and at the center of many of these schemes was another queen, one who claimed not only royal blood but a more legitimate right to rule, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. Mary was everything Elizabeth was not: Catholic, widowed, and mother to a son who might inherit not just one crown but two. She was bold, where Elizabeth was cautious, passionate, where Elizabeth was measured, and her presence on English soil after fleeing Scotland was both a personal and political dilemma. Elizabeth did not wish to condemn her cousin, nor did she wish to make her a martyr. And so for years, Mary remained a guest in chains, watched, protected, and yet feared, her letters monitored, her visitors limited, and still the plots continued to rise around her like smoke from a hidden fire. Breathe in slowly now and imagine the queen in her chambers, reading reports written in careful hand, describing plots with names she recognized, courtiers she had smiled at, priests she had banished and now learned had returned in disguise. Her fingers resting gently on the parchment, her face unreadable. She does not raise her voice. She does not weep. She reads, she considers, and she makes a choice, not from vengeance, but from necessity. For the crown she wears is not made of gold alone. It is made of vigilance, of solitude, of decisions that cannot be undone. And then came the moment when silence could no longer serve as shield, when the letters seized were enough, when the threat could no longer be hidden beneath protocol and mercy, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was brought to trial and sentenced to die. Elizabeth delayed the execution again and again, torn between justice and fear, between security and kinship, but at last the axe fell, and with it, something within Elizabeth was forever changed. For though she ruled still, she did so with the knowledge that survival demanded sacrifice, and that even queens, perhaps especially queens, must sometimes choose the cruelest path to ensure peace. Let your breath settle into that thought, into the cold stillness that follows a storm. For though the wind had calmed for a time, it was not yet over. Across the sea, Philip moved forward with his plan, assembling the Armada, vast and holy, to bring war to English shores, and Elizabeth, aware of every movement, prepared in her own quiet way. She fortified ports, gathered ships, spoke to her people not with fear, but with fire, and when the invasion came, she did not hide behind stone walls. She stood before her troops dressed in armor, saying she had the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too. The Spanish Armada came like thunder, great and solemn, but it was met by the chaos of English weather and the resilience of smaller, faster ships, and in the end, the storms scattered what bravery could not destroy, and the threat that had loomed for years dissolved into broken masts and driftwood scattered on northern coasts. Elizabeth did not boast, did not gloat. She thanked God, she thanked her sailors, and she returned to rule not with triumph, but with gratitude and calm. Now feel your body sink deeper into stillness, knowing that even as enemies surrounded her, Elizabeth never surrendered to panic or rage. She used time as her ally, patience as her sword, and diplomacy as her shield. She did not need to strike first, only to endure, to outlast, to protect the fragile balance she had built with so much care. She ruled not in peace, but in defiance of constant threat. And still, the realm held. The people sang, the land prospered, and her name became not only one of power, but of survival. The woman who faced storms at sea and in court, who lost so many and gained so little in return, except the loyalty of her nation and the awe of the world. Let that thought settle over you now like a warm cloak, the image of a queen standing calm while storms raged around her. Her eyes steady, her hands still, knowing that true strength does not shout, does not strike wildly, but waits, watches, and stands unmoved at the edge of danger. As the storms of rebellion, invasion, and uncertainty slowly receded into the distance, a gentler light began to fall over England. And under Elizabeth's steady gaze, the realm entered what would later be remembered not as a time of rest alone, but of brilliance, of rebirth, of flourishing creativity and expanding horizons. It was a time not without its shadows, but one where the light seemed stronger, more golden, as if the years of endurance had finally given way to years of becoming. And though the queen remained ever cautious, ever watchful, the people around her began to dream more freely, to speak more boldly, and to create as though the future belonged to their hands. Breathe slowly now and picture the winding streets of London, newly paved in parts, still muddy in others, but alive with voices and movement. Hear the distant echo of merchants calling, of children chasing through alleys, of ships unloading spices and fabrics from distant lands. The world was growing wider, and with it, the ambitions of the English heart. The court became not just a place of politics, but of culture, and Elizabeth, ever discerning, welcomed artists, poets, explorers, and thinkers into her presence, not to flatter her alone, but to reflect the vitality of a kingdom that was, at last, beginning to see itself not as threatened, but as radiant. In the theaters that rose along the Thames, new words filled the air like music words from pens sharpened by wonder and grief, by ambition and love. And at the center of this wave of beauty stood William Shakespeare, a man of humble origins who, like the Queen herself, transformed constraint into creativity in his plays. Elizabeth saw her people reflected, foolish, noble, angry, tender, striving, afraid, and in the stories of kings and queens, of lovers and ghosts, the realm found itself. Its spirit mirrored in words that would outlive their authors, that would reach through centuries to touch hearts not yet born. Let your breath soften with the rhythm of those verses. Imagine the flicker of torchlight on stage, the murmur of the audience before the curtain rises, and feel the pulse of a nation discovering itself not only in conquest, but in art, in the quiet power of imagination. Elizabeth understood this. She recognized that glory was not built only in battle, but in story, in beauty, in vision. And so she protected her playwrights and painters, her musicians and philosophers, even as others scoffed, even as some warned of the dangers of too much thought. And beyond the shores of England, sails bloomed like white flowers on the sea, as explorers ventured outward not only in search of wealth, but of knowledge, of new maps, new names, new ideas. Some voyages returned in triumph, others in silence, and still others never returned at all. But Elizabeth, though careful with her coin, encouraged this movement, for in each journey she saw the unfolding of something larger than power, a connection between people, between minds, between continents. And though much would be taken, and many harmed in the process, in this moment of expansion, there was also a sense of reaching for the unknown with both fear and awe. Let that duality sink into your breath now. the way golden light always casts a shadow, and yet still we move toward it because it calls us forward. Not blindly, but with wonder. This age was not perfect, and Elizabeth knew this. Famine touched the land. Disease returned in waves. Inequality persisted. And yet something outstirred a sense that something lasting was being built. Something greater than a single reign or ruler, a foundation of language and law, of culture and character, that would continue long after she had gone. In the court itself, the queen remained a sun around which all turned, her presence luminous, her wit sharp, her tastes refined, and yet she did not isolate herself in luxury. She walked among her people, listened to their voices, and allowed their triumphs to rise alongside her own. This was not only her age, but theirs, and in that quiet generosity, in that restraint and guidance, she earned a kind of love that no law could command and no sword could win. Now feel that warmth settle into your chest, as if you too walked beneath that golden sky, as if you too heard the hum of poets reciting lines newly written, as if you too stood in a crowd as the queen passed, radiant and still, and felt the hush that followed her like a tide of reverence. This was a time not born of ease, but of endurance, not of wealth alone, but of vision, and it is in that vision that the age earned its name. Let your eyes grow heavier now as the image of that world glows softly in your mind, a world of music and theater, of sea winds and parchment, of candles flickering in study halls and ships returning at dusk, a world guided by a queen who had no husband but ruled with a nation's heart, and who, by walking forward with patience and pride, made room for beauty to bloom in the shadow of hardship. This was the golden age not because it was without flaw, but because in its imperfection it shimmered with a light that came not from above, but from within, a light tended by minds and hands, by pens and sails, by those who dreamed beyond fear, and those who dared to believe that something extraordinary could grow from the quiet courage of a steady heart. Beneath the golden surface of a flourishing court, beyond the splendor of pageants and proclamations, behind the carefully crafted smile that adorned her face in public, Queen Elizabeth I carried within her a realm of silence, a place known only to herself, where sorrow lived in quiet corners and memories stirred in shadows. For though she was surrounded by the hum of admiration, by the weight of power and the gaze of an entire kingdom, she remained, in the most private hours, a woman alone, not in weakness, but in the solitude that power demands, a solitude not of circumstance, but of choice and consequence. And within that solitude, grief would sometimes rise gently like mist over the gardens of her heart. Let your breath lengthen now, slow and steady, as you imagine the great halls of Whitehall or Richmond emptied of ceremony. The laughter of courtiers faded into silence, the candlelight flickering low, casting a soft golden hue against the wooden beams and stone, and somewhere in that quiet palace, Elizabeth sits alone, not with fear, nor even with regret, but with remembrance, for hers was a life filled with decisions that demanded sacrifice. And those sacrifices had names, faces, and voices that time could never fully erase. She had lost her mother before she could form her own memories, her name Anne Boleyn spoken in whispers, in sermons, in warnings, not as mother but as scandal, as execution, as the lesson of a woman who reached too high. And though Elizabeth rarely spoke of her, surely the image lingered, a crown of shadow behind the crown of gold, a reminder that love and loyalty could be fleeting, that blood and power did not always live side by side, and that survival, for a woman of her station, would require the cold discipline of detachment. And still her heart did feel, and in the long years of her youth and reign, there were those who touched it deeply, most notably Robert Dudley, the man who had known her since childhood, whose presence in her life sparked both adoration and suspicion, a friendship so intimate that it blurred the lines of politics and desire. and yet never crossed them in the way the world expected or feared. He married another, and though Elizabeth claimed to accept it, her pain was real and lasting, for in him she saw something that belonged only to the days before the weight of the crown. And when he died, years later, she locked herself away, weeping not as a queen, but as a woman who had lost the one soul who truly understood the private music of her being. Let your body soften now as you think of the love never spoken fully, the losses never mourned in public, the tears wiped away in silence so as not to disturb the dignity of monarchy. For Elizabeth's life was one of careful concealment, of steady posture, of measured words. But her inner world was rich with feeling, with longing, with the same tenderness and ache that dwell in every human soul. And in her private chambers she wrote poems, verses filled with melancholy and reflection, where time and youth faded like the color of roses pressed between pages, and where the shadows of those she had outlived gathered like ghosts in the corridors of memory. She lost many her counselors and companions, her most trusted minds and voices. One by one, they fell away like autumn leaves, and each loss left her slightly quieter, slightly more withdrawn, not bitter but weary, not defeated but softened, her spirit not broken but weathered, as stone is shaped gently by wind and rain. And as age crept forward, she looked into the mirror and found not only the sovereign, but the woman behind the mask, with thinning hair, tired eyes, and a heart still full of echoes. Now let your breath grow deeper and allow that image to settle. The queen walking slowly through her gardens at twilight, her gown trailing lightly over gravel paths, the scent of lavender and old earth rising in the air, the birds quiet now, the sun dipping low, and her thoughts drifting backward, not with bitterness, but with a kind of aching grace, the way one might look at a house once lived in, now empty but still filled with light. In her final years, she spoke less, smiled less, and retreated into thought more often. She did not fear death, but she seemed reluctant to surrender to it, as though she had become so bound to the identity of queen that the letting go felt like a kind of dissolution, a fading not just of body, but of the self she had so carefully and powerfully created. She had ruled longer than any monarch before her, had seen the world bend around her name, and now, as that world began to dim, she found herself not clinging, but reflecting, as if each breath were a quiet prayer of release. Let that stillness fill your chest now, as if you too walked alongside her in those silent corridors, feeling the weight of years not as burden, but as softness, as the fabric of a life lived fully, with both sorrow and splendor, with both iron and lace. Elizabeth's private sorrows were never weaknesses, but reminders that even those who rise above all others carry the same tenderness within, the same yearning for connection, for understanding, for peace. And in that solitude, there was something sacred, something deeply human, something profoundly beautiful in the knowledge that even the most powerful must bow to the quiet ache of love lost, of years past, of hearts remembered. And perhaps it was in these sorrows that her greatness most clearly shone, not in her triumphs, but in her quiet resilience, her calm endurance, her steady walk through the garden of memory. As the years continued their quiet, steady procession, time began to gather around Elizabeth, not as enemy, but as companion, walking beside her with a kind of gentle insistence, touching her hands, her voice, her bones, reminding her softly that no crown, no matter how carefully worn, can delay the passage of age. And though she had ruled longer than any sovereign before her, and had watched the world shift and stretch beneath her gaze, there came a moment not sudden, but subtle, when even she, the queen who had defined an age, began to feel the soft pull of finality whispering at the edges of her days. Let your breath grow long and slow now as you imagine the stillness of her palace in winter, the fires burning low in the hearth, the curtains drawn against the cold, and Elizabeth moving quietly from room to room, her steps slower, her body thinner, her mind still sharp, but more often turned inward than outward. The voices that once filled the court had begun to fade, her old friends, her trusted counselors, the poets and thinkers who once brought laughter and challenge to her table many, had passed into memory, and those who remained looked at her now, not just with loyalty, but with sorrow. For the queen who had once dazzled in gold and light now sat wrapped in thought, wrapped in the gravity of all she had lived. She no longer wore her jewels as she once had, no longer stood before mirrors arranging every detail of appearance for courtly perfection. Instead, her beauty had shifted, no longer found in polish and paint, but in something deeper, something quiet and luminous. The grace of age accepted without resistance, the dignity of one who no longer needed to be seen to know her worth. Her robes still trailed behind her, but they did not carry power anymore. They carried memory, the weight of all she had borne, and all she would soon leave behind. Now let yourself soften into that image of Elizabeth seated beside the fire, her eyes not focused on the flames, but somewhere distant, perhaps remembering her childhood at Hatfield, the rustle of leaves in the garden, or her first hesitant days on the throne, or the sound of Robert Dudley's laughter echoing down a corridor that no longer exists. Her thoughts, though rarely spoken aloud, were surely full of such things, scenes revisited, decisions reconsidered, names whispered only in the quiet hours when no one else remained awake. And though her heart was strong, her body had begun to tire, not in sudden illness, but in a gradual dimming, as though each breath became a little heavier, each morning a little slower to rise. In her final months, she began to withdraw further, not in fear, but in preparation, as if she sensed the closing of her own chapter and wished to greet it not with spectacle, but with stillness. She refused her bed, choosing instead to sit for hours upon hours, cloaked and motionless, resting in her chair like a tree that knows winter is coming, not speaking unless spoken to, not eating unless urged, and yet still listening, still present, still quietly holding all the threads of a world that had once spun wildly around her. Let your breath fall into rhythm with hers now, slow and deep, as if the weight of 90 years of rain and remembrance pressed gently into your chest, as if you too felt the hush that comes when life begins to turn toward dusk. Her ladies-in-waiting watched her with quiet devotion, uncertain how to ease her passage, unable to do more than remain. And Elizabeth, though surrounded, moved now in a realm all her own, walking mentally through gardens of the past, revisiting the portraits hung not on walls, but in the chambers of her memory. And then came the night when she no longer rose, no longer spoke, her body wrapped in velvet, her hands folded, her lips sealed in peace. There was no dramatic parting, no proclamation, only the soft release of breath, the quiet surrender of a life fully lived. And in the stillness that followed, the court stood suspended, the candles burned low, and the realm itself seemed to exhale, as if all of England had known this moment would come, and yet still hoped it never would. Let that quiet settle into your body now, the reverence of a life ending not in spectacle, but in stillness, not in fear, but in quiet honor. Elizabeth had ruled with patience, spoken with purpose, waited with wisdom, and in her final days she had given even her leaving the weight and grace of royalty. Her crown passed not with violence, but with calm, and her name, Elizabeth Regina, was carried into history not only for her reign, but for her restraint, not only for her victories, but for her silence, her solitude, her soul. As the sun rose over the palace the next morning, light fell softly on the floor where she once stood, where her shadow once passed each day. And though she was gone, something remained, an echo, a calm, a memory suspended in golden light, and in the hearts of those she left behind. And in the centuries to come, that echo would deepen, not with noise, but with reverence. For hers was not a legacy of thunder, but a flame steady, enduring, quietly brilliant. After the candles of mourning were extinguished and her crown was gently placed upon the next sovereign's brow, after the black cloths were lifted and the bells fell silent, the memory of Elizabeth I did not fade into the dust of dynasties past. Instead, it settled deeply into the soul of the nation she had ruled for so long, not merely as a series of dates, wars, or decrees, but as something much more elusive and enduring, a presence, a tone, a silhouette cast across time. For legacy, true legacy, does not reside only in what one builds or conquers, but in what one awakens in others, in the imagination, in the myth, in the quiet places where memory transforms into meaning. Let your breath lengthen and your thoughts settle into the stillness of reflection, and imagine England in the years after her passing. A land changed not only by progress and exploration, but by the very idea of itself, shaped by a queen who had dared to rule alone, who had refused to marry for convenience, who had outlasted plots, invasions, and centuries of expectation, and who had done so with a strange and luminous balance of steel and silk. She was both sovereign and symbol, both woman and myth, and because of that, her memory became more than history, it became story. And story, once rooted in the hearts of people, rarely dies. The name Elizabeth, once whispered with uncertainty, became a standard, a torch passed forward through generations, and her image stern, white-faced, adorned with jewels and defiance, was preserved not in fading portraits, but in the minds of her people, in the poems that praised her, in the songs that mourned her, in the streets that bore her name. She had become something greater than the body that once wore the crown. She had become an emblem of what a woman could be when she refused to be less than whole. Now breathe slowly and imagine those who followed her, monarchs who inherited her throne but not her fire. Women who admired her strength even as they feared her solitude. Nations that watched England not with scorn but with a kind of wary admiration. For here had ruled a queen who had turned the expectation of weakness into the expression of quiet, unwavering command, and whose very life had asked a question still echoing centuries later. What does it mean to live fully as oneself, unclaimed, unbroken, undiminished? Her legacy was not without complication, for no reign is without shadow, and no life without contradiction. There were decisions made from caution that cost others dearly. There were lives lost in the name of stability, and voices silenced in the name of order. And yet, even within that, there is room to see not a saint, but a sovereign human, flawed, shaped by fear and duty, and still deeply visionary, deeply brave, deeply aware that she was playing a role no woman had ever been allowed to write for herself. Let that thought rest gently within you as your breath grows quieter, as your muscles soften into stillness, and consider that perhaps her greatest legacy was not the peace she preserved or the empire she extended, but the image she left behind of a woman unafraid to define herself, a woman who turned solitude into strength, who made intelligence a crown of its own, and who remained, in her final hour as in her first, entirely her own. In time, the phrase, the Elizabethan age, came to mean something grand and shining, a time of discovery, of poetry, of courage. But behind those headlines lies the steady rhythm of her governance, the careful balancing of impossible tensions, the restraint that held chaos at bay. It was not merely the glories of sea captains or the verses of playwrights that made her reign golden. It was the silence she held when words would fail, the decisions made in the loneliness of night, the patience that turned uncertainty into calm. Now let your body grow heavy and your thoughts grow slow as you imagine her walking once more through the long halls of memory, her hand brushing against the stone wall she knew so well, her gaze turned not backward in regret, but downward in thought and forward into eternity. For those who live boldly do not simply vanish, they echo, they shimmer in the edges of things, and even now, her story still flickers in the pages of books, in the voices of actors, in the quiet admiration of those who dare to walk alone. And so we leave her not in mourning, but in stillness, not in grief, but in gratitude. For the life she lived gave shape to a future that might have never come otherwise. She showed what could be done when a woman stood not behind a man, but beside none at all, and carried the weight of crown and country not with pride, but with purpose, with discipline, with astonishing grace. Let your eyes grow heavy now and your breath fall into rhythm with the quiet truth of her legacy, that power need not roar to endure, that solitude can be sacred, and that sometimes the strongest legacy is not what is declared, but what is quietly remembered. For Elizabeth, remembered she will be not because she was perfect, but because she was utterly herself. Now, as our journey through time and memory gently comes to an end, allow your body to sink deeper into the softness that surrounds you. Feel the quiet embrace of the night as it settles around your shoulders like a warm, familiar cloak, and let your breath slow even more, long and steady, as though you are breathing in the calm itself, letting it fill every corner of your being, the gentle rhythm of your inhalation and exhalation, carrying you farther from the noise of the day and closer to the serene depths of restful sleep. Imagine yourself now in a quiet garden, the kind that might have whispered beneath the moonlight in the days of Elizabeth, where soft petals release their fragrance in the still air, where the gentle rustle of leaves is the only sound to break the silence, and where the stars above twinkle faintly, distant but comforting, like tiny lanterns guiding you toward peace. There is no rush here, no urgency, only the slow unfolding of night, the tender folding of your thoughts into stillness, the soothing cadence of time itself breathing you down into softness. Let your mind drift gently through the corridors of history, where queens and poets, sailors and dreamers all walk quietly side by side, their stories mingling in the cool night air like whispers carried on a gentle breeze. Feel their presence not as weight, but as a lightness, a comfort, a reminder that time is a tapestry woven from many threads, and that you, too, are a part of its endless pattern, held within the same quiet rhythm that has moved through ages, calm and unbroken. Feel the muscles of your face soften, your shoulders release their tension, your hands rest gently as if cradled by the night itself. And with every breath, sink deeper still, knowing that in this moment, there is only peace, only safety, only the gentle pulse of your own heart, guiding you toward dreams yet to come. Let the softness of this quiet hour wrap around you, soothing every thought, quieting every worry, until all that remains is the warm, slow unfolding of rest. As the night deepens, allow yourself to drift away from the world of waking thoughts, to leave behind the cares and concerns of the day, to surrender fully to the tender embrace of sleep, where your mind may wander freely through dreamscapes painted with the colors of history and imagination, where you can travel safely through time and space, carried not by urgency, but by calm, not by noise, but by silence, not by haste, but by patience. Know that as you close your eyes, the stories of queens and voyagers, of poets and seas, will continue to live softly beneath your eyelids, that the echoes of their lives will hum quietly like lullabies, and that you are held in a gentle balance between what has been and what is yet to be, between memory and hope, between the steady beat of your heart and the silent song of the night. Let your breathing grow slower still, deeper still, as your body sinks into the place where dreams begin, a place of rest and renewal, where the mind can find peace, where the soul can breathe freely, and where you are safe to let go, to drift, to sleep deeply and well, knowing that when morning comes, you will wake refreshed, renewed, and ready to greet the new day. And now, as you float gently on the calm waves of night, feel gratitude for this quiet time, this sacred pause between waking and dreaming, this moment of surrender and peace, and let yourself be carried away softly, tenderly, into the deep and healing silence of sleep. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with light, with calm, and with the gentle wisdom of history's quiet embrace.